On this Wednesday night, horror in Laval, Quebec. A city bus crashes into a daycare in what appears to be a deliberate act.
I still can see his eyes, you know, how hysteric he was.
The driver facing charges including first-degree murder. Deepening desperation and diplomatic difficulties in Syria.
You need to deal with the government of Bashar Assad.
And in Turkey, earthquake survivors hope for miracles in the rubble. Our Jackson Proskow is in the city of Adana. Plus, the claims Beijing tried to interfere in Canadian democracy. The evidence suggesting the Prime Minister's office knew about the threat years ago.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
This is the scene at a daycare in Laval, Quebec, after a city bus crashed into the building in what appears to have been a deliberate act. It happened at 8:30 this morning as parents were dropping off their children. 2 of those children were killed. 6 other children are in hospital. Good evening and thanks for joining us. Police say the driver of that bus, a 51-year-old man who is a transit employee, is facing 2 counts of first-degree murder along with attempted murder and assault. That suggests this was not an accident. Police are not disclosing more information about a possible motive. The daycare, though, is not along a usual bus route. Mike Armstrong is in Laval for us tonight. Mike.
Well, Donna, the biggest question about what happened here behind me really is motivation. Why did it happen? Well, the location clearly makes it look intentional.
This isn't a bus making a wrong move on a busy boulevard. The driver had to go out of his way to reach the daycare. It's located at the end of a dead-end road, and then the driver would have had to make a right turn into a long driveway.
Screaming and crying and...
This woman was one of the first people into the daycare after the crash. She lives nearby and says it was chaos. She also witnessed the takedown of the bus driver. According to witnesses, he exited the bus naked and hysterical. 4 men jumped him and held him down until police arrived.
I saw him when the police dragged him in the vehicle. His eye was like popping out, you know, and he was nude. He didn't have any pants. So I still can see his eyes, you know, how hysteric he was, that man.
According to the city of Laval, the driver had been with the local bus service for a decade. He's 51 years old. Police won't say if he had any known links to the daycare, possibly a child who went there or a relationship with an educator. They'll only say the man faces serious charges.
Has been arrested for careless driving and homicide.
Now, according to some of the people who got inside the daycare to help, some of the children were trapped in debris. They pulled one out but couldn't get to another. Firefighters took over from there. Parts of the roof were falling on us, this man says. They made us leave. This was a very traumatic morning for parents. The incident was just before 8:30 a.m. There would have been children still being dropped off. The children who were okay after the crash were taken to a safe place to wait. They were then picked up by panicked parents who then held them, understandably, very tightly. I've seen my 2 little ones, this grandmother says. They're good and not traumatized. Now, services are being put in place for the children and the parents, counseling to help them deal with what they went through. But this was a very difficult crime scene with multiple very young children as victims. Often in cases like this, there'll be counseling for staff and police, things like that. Here, within hours, they were even putting in a crisis team to have counselors ready for the paramedics, to help them deal with what they went through. Donna?
Mike Armstrong in Laval, Quebec. That anyone would intentionally drive a bus into a daycare is impossible to comprehend. The driver faces 2 charges of first-degree murder, plus charges of attempted murder and aggravated assault. Touria Izri has more on what we know about him.
Not far from the crash site, police are posted outside a home, believed to be where the alleged killer lived. 51-year-old Pierre Ny St-Amand, a longtime employee of Laval Transport. It's shocking, says a coworker. It's inexplicable. He was always smiling. I have no idea what happened. Hours after the crash, St-Amand was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. St-Amand is being interrogated by police. Photos from inside the daycare show the destruction. The realization that the children may have been targeted has sent a chill across the country.
To rise.
MPs stood for a moment of silence.
There are no words for parents who've lost their children this way.
Quebec Premier François Legault is also shaken.
All my thoughts are with the children, with the parents, and with the employees.
Growing grief and so many unanswered questions about the man behind the wheel now charged with murder. Touria Izri, Global News, Ottawa.
Now to Turkey and Syria, where desperation is building and the death toll keeps rising. The number is staggering. More than 12,000 people are known to have died. Even many of those fortunate enough to have survived have nothing left. Rescuers face shortages of trucks, fuel, equipment, and time, even as they hear cries for help from those still trapped. In some cases, the cries are answered. This newborn was rescued from the rubble in southeastern Turkey, wrapped in a blanket and carried away. One life saved, but there's no word on his family. The future of so many young lives is uncertain. 16 rescued babies were transferred to Turkey's capital on the presidential plane. The little information that's known about them is written on their foreheads. Jackson Proskow is in the earthquake zone tonight. Jackson?
Donna, the frantic search and recovery efforts continue around the clock. But in the bitter winter cold, it's an increasingly desperate race against time. There are holes in the skyline of Adana, places where buildings crumbled in the middle of the night. All that's left is rubble, mixed with the ghostly belongings of the missing and the dead.
It's like a war, you know what I mean? We didn't know what was going on. It's really emotional to see, but you cannot do anything, you know what I mean?
Both of Iren's parents died when their 14-story apartment building collapsed as they slept. She watched over the grim search, waiting for rescuers to find her mother's body. I just want to be able to see my mother, she says. I want to be able to pray for her. The air is thick with dust and the smell of death. Still, rescuers hope there might be at least one survivor in a place where at least 60 people died. 1 block away, there's another missing tower and more haunting signs of lives cut short. Adana is a city of high-rises. Many of them are now structurally compromised, unsafe to occupy. And so the city's parks have become makeshift encampments. Hundreds more tents are crammed into an outdoor market, where people burn whatever they can find to stay warm as volunteers deliver food. I just couldn't sit at home and do nothing, says this organizer. I'm here to share their pain. As night falls, a fresh search begins at yet another collapsed site. With hand tools and buckets, they dig deep into the ruins, hoping to find a miracle. The coming days are expected to bring a huge increase in the amount of foreign aid and the number of foreign search and rescue workers on the ground. But each passing minute in these conditions only increases the odds that their mission will be focused more on recovery. Donna?
All right, Jackson Proskow in Adana, Turkey tonight. Thanks. Canada's International Development Minister says an assessment team is on its way to Turkey. It's a handful of military and global affairs officials, not an actual disaster relief team. They will assess what tools Canada can best use to respond. Turkey's president visited the earthquake zone today, and he rejected growing criticism of his government's response to the earthquakes. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who faces re-election in May, said it's not possible to prepare for a disaster of this scale. Erdogan was in Kahramanmaraş today. He met survivors sheltering in tents. He's facing a lot of criticism for not deploying rescue crews fast enough to all the affected cities. He acknowledged early problems in Turkey's response, but says operations are running smoothly now. Many Turks have complained a lack of equipment and support prevented them from reaching the buried. There are reports access to social media has been restricted, though it's not. Relief efforts in Syria are an even bigger challenge. State media there is reporting nearly 300,000 people have been displaced. That does not include regions held by rebel factions in a country that's endured more than a decade of war. Aid agencies are trying to find a way in, but the main land routes, such as this road connecting Turkey and Syria, you can see are severely damaged. Ross Lord reports on how the world, including Canada, is trying to help.
These are the images the world wants to see. A little girl, stuck for more than a day, now freed and carried through crowds of joyous onlookers. Sadly, more common are images like these. An earthquake survivor explaining how he lost 20 family members, leaving him and his 2-year-old daughter to sort out the future. My other young daughter died in my arms, he says, and my wife died next to me. As other Syrians donate blood and personal possessions, the outside world is also looking for ways to help, including Canada.
As Canadian Red Cross, we are on the ground. We have some of our delegates in Syria and in the region, and we're scaling up with additional delegates, people to support the Syrian Arab Red Crescent.
The federal government is matching contributions to the Red Cross, and Syrian Canadians hope their homeland isn't overlooked.
I was just looking at the map of Syria, and it was just left alone. And no one really was directing their efforts to help those people, thousands of people that they're in immediate need of help.
Security analysts say launching an effective relief effort might be impossible, with road networks and hospitals barely functioning in Syria after 11 years of civil war. An estimated 15 million Syrians were in need of humanitarian assistance before the earthquake. Canada and other Western countries who've been punishing the Syrian government with sanctions face another predicament in providing help.
But in the case of Syria in particular, it is highly problematic because you need to deal at some point or another with the government of Bashar al-Assad. They have to grant permission.
There's some promising news. The United Nations indicating deliveries of cross-border aid from Turkey to northwest Syria could resume this week after being suspended by the earthquakes as the race against time continues. Ross Lord, Global News.
Ukraine's president made a surprise visit to the UK today and received a hero's welcome.
Well, we've all been worried about you and thinking about your country for so long. I can't tell you.
Thanks so much.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy met King Charles at Buckingham Palace, and he went to 10 Downing Street with the British Prime Minister. He got a standing ovation as he addressed a joint session of Parliament at Westminster Hall. Zelenskyy thanked Britain for being a loyal ally, and he made an impassioned plea for fighter jets, offering the helmet of a Ukrainian fighter pilot as a gift.
He is one of our most successful aces, and he's one of our kings. And the writing on the helmet reads, "We have freedom, give us wings to protect it."
Britain's Prime Minister says nothing is off the table, that fighter jets are part of the conversation, but nothing has been promised. Zelenskyy then traveled to France for a meeting with the French president. Accusations China tried to meddle in Canadian elections. Coming up, the evidence suggesting the Prime Minister's office knew about the threat years ago. We have an update to a story we first brought you back in November about China's alleged attempts to interfere in Canada's democratic process. Global News has seen evidence suggesting the Prime Minister's office was looking into that threat as early as 2017, well before the 2019 federal election. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson explains.
She's the Prime Minister's most senior and trusted advisor. Katie Telford has served as Trudeau's chief of staff since the Liberals took office in 2015. And documents show that 2 years later, the threat of China meddling in Canada's elections was on her radar. Global News has reviewed a June 2017 memo prepared for the Prime Minister at Telford's request. According to the document, senior intelligence officials had solid evidence that Chinese agents were, quote, assisting Canadian candidates running for political offices, working to infiltrate, quote, all levels of government. It warns that Chinese officials were working to evade detection by Canadian authorities, using local pro-Beijing community groups to target Canadian politicians considered strategically valuable. The memo Global News reviewed appears to be an advanced draft. Whether it was ever finalized and sent to the Prime Minister's office is unclear.
99% of the time when either the PM or the PM senior staff asks for a memo, it would go.
In a statement, Alison Murphy, a spokesperson for the Prime Minister, said the PMO could not comment on the memo's specifics or existence. Murphy said the Prime Minister is regularly briefed on national security, including foreign interference, and that he and his staff often seek additional information. Murphy stated the government will continue to take action to protect Canadians and work closely with our allies and partners to respond to illegal and unacceptable behavior by authoritarian states like China. Global News had previously reported on documents that alleged Beijing covertly funded a clandestine network in the 2019 election, targeting at least 11 candidates. A government source told Global News that warnings similar to the information in the 2017 draft memo did make it to the Prime Minister's office.
It's the broad approach to China, which is becoming more assertive, that leads me to believe that if they've done this in the past, they're certainly going to do it again, and they may push a little bit harder.
The Liberal government is defending its record, pointing to actions they've taken, including introducing legislation that would close some loopholes for foreign funding in elections and considering the possibility of a foreign agents registry. But some experts say that Canada's allies have taken much more aggressive action to safeguard their democracies and question why the government isn't doing more in the face of years of warnings. Donna?
Mercedes Stevenson, thanks. Ready for re-election ahead, why Joe Biden's State of the Union address could hint at a second presidential bid. The American president laid out his agenda last night for the next year in office, and what many people watching the State of the Union address were looking for are signs of whether Joe Biden intends to run again in 2024. He not only listed his achievements, he called out some Republicans and got heckled for it.
Some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. Folks, the idea is that we're not going to be moved into being threatened to default on the debt if we don't respond. Folks.
Reggie Cicchini on the State of the Union and Biden's intentions.
It's still not official.
My fellow Americans.
But U.S. President Joe Biden's State of the Union address left little doubt that his re-election campaign is ready to ramp up.
I've never been more optimistic about our future.
That future is built on 2 years of legislative wins and a political career that's taught this president how to break through partisan roadblocks.
One of the biggest things people were looking for in this State of the Union address was, would Joe Biden have the vitality and the mental acuity to actually continue in the role as president? What Joe Biden did was pretty masterful.
Halfway through Biden's presidency, his victories are being outweighed by ongoing concerns, namely the economy, one that is improving, albeit slowly.
Inflation is coming down, take-home pay of workers is going up slightly.
But his base isn't buying that. Only 37% of Democrats want him to seek a second term in 2024. In other words, don't expect Biden to announce early.
What would happen if he announces that he's not going to run or that he's going to run? We might see an exodus coming out of his cabinet.
Jumping into the race too early could spark others to do the same, risking a loss of the very people Biden needs for the next 2 years, with tensions high in the Republican-led House. Reggie Cicchini, Global News, Washington.
Miraculous moments next, the stories of survival from the earthquake zone. The scenes from the earthquake zones in Turkey and Syria are difficult to watch. Thousands of buildings have been reduced to rubble. Many of them collapsed while people were asleep. There are far too many unhappy stories, but sprinkled among them are remarkable tales of rescue. Eric Sorensen on the hope amidst the despair.
We yearn to see pictures like these at a time like this. Karam, a little Syrian boy who cannot possibly know how lucky he is to be alive, but he knows he's happy. For the rescuers, the white helmets, just one life saved makes the hours of digging and despair worthwhile. In the collapse of a large building, it is rare for even one person to be pulled out alive.
Easy.
But to witness several seemingly miraculous rescues over 2 days suggests how massive the scale of destruction has been across southern Turkey and northern Syria. For at least the second time, a newborn has emerged from the rubble. In Hatay, Turkey, a tiny little one, the rescuers both distraught and tender. Every patient on every stretcher, another unlikely story of survival. But for every uplifting moment, there are hours and now days of heart-rending dread.
There are some babies. I have 2 nephews here, and I'm not sure if they are leaving or not, but there is still some hope because their house, their room, is not totally collapsed.
In pile after pile of pulverized buildings, the dogged determination of rescuers leave no concrete block unturned. The images are startling. The white helmets in Besina, Syria, lift a child, his father and sister to safety. Elation for a distraught community. An Israeli rescue team went through the ceiling of one Turkish home to rescue 2 people. Even a little dog, half buried in rubble, reportedly survived.
We're still in the phase of life-saving measures, so it's still about search and rescue. It's still about first aid, medical support for those who are injured.
The hope to find survivors will fade. The miraculous moments will stop. And anger will rise up for buildings too weak and a response too slow. But hope is not exhausted, not yet. This child trapped, being given capfuls of water. The mayor of Istanbul tweeted that he's okay. Smile, little guy. Eric Sorensen, Global News.
That is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Fries, and help is flooding in from around the world. And while the federal government considers whether to send a disaster relief team, this team of volunteers from BC is already en route with medical supplies and rescue equipment, hoping to make a difference. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.